Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
And I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
That's a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Well, Admiral Byrd, may I ask you, is there a great difference between the top of the world and the bottom of the world?
There is. Now, the North Pole is the center of an ocean 10,000 feet deep. The South Pole, the center of a plateau 10,000 feet high. The North Polar Sea is surrounded by continents that are slightly frozen. The Antarctic continent is surrounded by a belt of ice, frozen seas of at least 1,200 miles thick. Now, the South is a plateau. It gets, in some places, 14,000 feet up. I've been over areas about 13,000, and it's a little bit chilly up there. So there's that big difference between the top and bottom of the world. The North really isn't very cold up there on the Arctic Ocean.
Hi, and welcome to another video documentary from A Plain Truth. Today I want to get into Antarctica and what's been going on for 60 plus years. There's a lot going on down in Antarctica that's not reported at all. So Antarctica, 242 years ago, Captain Cook gets on his boat called the Resolution and sails 60,000 miles. 60,000 miles. Now, the Earth's circumference is said to be 25,000 miles, a little under. So that means he traveled over 2 times around the Earth circumference, yet could not find the inland passage. And he was off course a lot, too, which bodes well for the flat Earth theory of an Antarctic ice wall that keeps the oceans in. Again, in 1839, some 70 years later, Captain Ross explores for 4 years, never finds an inland passage. Also, he was way off course as well. And the first naval expedition went down there. Nikola Tesla is very important in this because we're going to talk about him later, and the electromagnetic energy that he defined in his work, also creating the radio, Wi-Fi, tapped plasma-free energy from the sky with his Windcliffe building that J.P. Morgan destroyed when he discovered that free energy couldn't make money on free energy, except for the military and whatnot. And then he created the ultimate directed energy weapon, as well as alternating current, which we use today. Shackleton goes down the Antarctic and names his ship Nimrod. Nimrod, you remember after the Babylonian days, the Tower of Babylon. We'll get into that a little bit. Now, this is a picture everybody knows from Dr. Goddard and his alleged rocket that he fired into space and started the first missile into space, it said, in 1920. But what it was really about, folks, was this proves vacuum in space, because he had to back up Einstein's general theory of relativity. We'll get into that a little bit. So 1926, Admiral Byrd flies over the North Pole for the first time. Now, Admiral Byrd was a 33-degree Freemason. He captained no ships other than ships to the Arctic and Antarctic. So he was the poster boy for this whole movement to the poles, or alleged poles. Byrd makes first trip voyage to Antarctica. The Great Market Crash is 1929. At the same time, Rockefeller has plenty of funds to fund an expedition down to Antarctica, where they discover the Rockefeller Islands. 1938, the defeated Germans from World War II have no industry, very poor, recovering for World War I, all of a sudden decides to send ships down the Antarctica to create New Schwabenland. What was that all about? Admiral Byrd and the U.S. Antarctic Service Expedition begins in 1939, as we said, and 1946, the Antarctic expeditions get initiated, the overall game plan, and right away in 1947, within a couple months, the Roswell incident is reported about UFOs, and then right after that, Operation High Jump is created. Now, Operation High Jump, why would they call it Operation High Jump? Could it be about 150 to 300 foot ice walls that surround the Earth, that keep the oceans in, that they wanted to get up on to see what was behind it? So along with Russia, the hated enemy at the time, the Cold War, Britain and Norway, the mission was instant. They created it on the fly, involved over 30 ships, 4,700 militarized personnel. The mission was unknown. I've got the information I'll present from Admiral saying, you know, what is the mission? We're 2 weeks away. We don't even know where we're going. It was supposed to be a 6 to 8 month mission. There was 3 task force that were sent down. They all returned within 6 weeks' time.
Later reports indicated that Admiral Byrd was given 8 months and unlimited funding to go in and pull this thing successfully off. But we also know that within 8 weeks he was totally defeated.
And I'm having a hard time finding any information why. What did they find out down there? The mission was unknown. They had to unmothball Navy ships from World War II. A lot of the sailors were rookies. The pilots had never flown in any type of Antarctic or Arctic weather. Chilean paper reported mass casualties. But out of this all, Admiral Byrd reported that he had seen UFOs down there. Now, the Antarctic ice wall, as I said, is 150 to 300 feet tall. And if it does circumnavigate the entire Earth, that would make sense that they were down there to investigate. So that's what we're trying to find out a little bit on this mission. So they sent down in 1939 with Admiral Byrd. You can see this snowcat they created. These are 10-foot tall tires. See how tall people are? They loaded it onto the ship sideways. They put an aircraft carrier or an airplane on top of this. So they were going to do is lift with these cranes up onto the deck, drive this vehicle as far as they could, and then launch a plane. And I'm theorizing that they were launching it to see how far they could get inland to find the dome. The next operation the next year, after complete failure of Operation High Jump, is Operation Windmill. Now, to tilt at windmills means to fight battles with imaginary enemies, to fight against unimportant enemies or issues. That's an interesting take on it. 1949, Secretary of Navy and former Secretary of Defense James Forrestal is suicided. Just happens to fall after he's recovering, getting healthier. 16 floors at the Bethesda Naval Facility in Maryland. 1949, also Operation Paperclip begins, where they take a bunch of 3,000 Nazi Germany's top eugenicists, biologists, rocket scientists, and take them down through Vatican rat lines, through the Vatican assistance, down to South America and in the United States, and put them in businesses, including into NASA, which we'll get into in a minute. So after 48 Windmill, Eisenhower creates Operation Solarium, which was the strategy for occupying the Antarctic, it looks like. And Operation Deep Freeze, that happened from 56 to 2006, 50 years, was airlifting to the Antarctic on these big C-141s and whatnot. So Operation Deep Freeze 1, Operation Deep Freeze 2 continues, and we can see also that the International Geophysical Year is created. Now, this is with 12 countries, including the U.S. and Soviet Union. They volunteered to establish 56 research sites. Now, listen to this. These countries initially settled on an international gentleman's agreement to suspend political claims and differences during the program. What was down there that they had to suspend gentlemen's agreements, where we're supposedly in a Cold War with the Russians, and all of a sudden we're in partnerships with a gentleman agreement to send all these massive equipment and ships down to the Antarctic just 10 years after Operation High Jump? Something's going on. Now, just an interesting sidebar, Steely Dan in his album that includes the single IGY. IGY stands for International Geophysical Year, and that was in 1957, but Steely Dan Fagan wrote about it with these lyrics in the 90s, I believe. Get your ticket to that wheel in space while there's time. The fix is in. You'll be a witness to the game of chance in the sky. You know we've got to win. A just machine to make big decisions, programmed by fellows with compassion and vision. Will be clean when their work is done. Will be eternally free, yes, and eternally young. Ooh. Are they referring to machine over man, programming the people, and when their work is done, they'll be clean because we'll all be transhumanists? Interesting story here. We'll get into that a little more too. So in 1957, the Russians constitute the space Cold War, start the new Cold War, as they launch Sputnik into space. And also Freemason Admiral Byrd is possibly suicided. I haven't looked into that much.
March 11, 1947. I have just attended a staff meeting at the Pentagon. I have stated fully my discovery and the message from the Master. All is duly recorded. The President has been advised. I am now detained for several hours, 6 hours, 39 minutes to be exact. I am interviewed intently by top security forces and a medical team. It was an ordeal. I am placed under strict control via the national security provisions of this United States of America. I am ordered to remain silent in regard to all that I have learned on the behalf of humanity. Incredible. I am reminded that I am a military man and I must obey orders.
Now, Admiral Byrd led these expeditions pretty much exclusively. And we can read that Admiral Byrd was an active Freemason. He became a member of the Federal Lodge. He was a member of the National Sojourners Chapter in Washington. In the Antarctic expedition of 1933, 60 of the 82 members were Freemasons, and they established the first Antarctic Lodge number 777 of New Zealand Constitution. And then here we can read in Byrd's book on the quest for the inner passage. He was family as part of the elitist crowd through kinship with England's royal family. In the quest for the inner passage, we can learn that the One World Order paymaster John Rockefeller financed every single one of his early expeditions. His recordings of scientific information gathered was enough to fill 7 large books, was turned over to Rockefeller before anyone else had a chance to study the findings, only to vanish and never be seen again. And then in 1958, as I said, NASA was founded by the V-2 rocket specialist from Nazi, with the Wunderkind of Germany, Mr. Werner von Braun, who ran the program all the way through the Apollo programs, and on a sidebar went down to the Antarctic in the 60s to gather moon rocks to be sold as moon rocks, which turned out to be later proven to be fake. Also, the NASA administrator, the first administrator, was a gentleman who came from Paramount Movie Studios, and before that he worked for the Naval Underwater Laboratories to create the fake Apollo scenes, allegedly, and his name was T. Keith Glennon. After he finished, he was taken care of by Lockheed and very lot of money in his next job. The ATS Treaty was founded, the Antarctic Treaty System, with over 20 countries effectively declaring Antarctica off limits to everyone.
Competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are now 7 nations very much interested. Russia is interested tremendously. That I'm sure of. Australia has an expedition down there. The Argentine, the Chile, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. Now, you can understand those people down there being interested because they live down there, the New Zealanders, the Argentinians, the Chileans, and Australians. And so we don't do much about claiming anything.
The Antarctic is strictly governed since 1959 by the United States and UN through the Antarctic Treaty System, or ATS.
Community could set aside the Arctic for peaceful purposes only, and that the nations in the Arctic could agree that that is a common interest, that they all have a common interest in managing the Arctic for peaceful purposes only. It's not an issue of economics, it's not an issue of environmental protection, it's an issue that crosses all of these uses and interactions.
The Antarctic Treaty Summit, convening on the treaty's 50th anniversary, is to ensure the treaty stays in place. But it's also to showcase to the world an agreement in which sovereignty claims have been set aside.
The lesson from the Antarctic Treaty is it matters not what your political system is, and it doesn't actually matter what your culture is, because there are some fundamental principles about the way in which people want to live that can actually underpin the way in which governance functions for the common good. And the Antarctic Treaty is the best example that we've had so far of how to work together.
Today, when the major challenges for civilization, climate change, depleted resources, are not national but global issues, there's ever-increasing pressure to find a new model for governance. The Antarctic Treaty could be it.
The question is, what's happened since then within the treaty system? Now, one of the provisions in the treaty under those environmental protocols deals with tourism. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because we are all going to be directly affected by that. As I said to you earlier, the area of the Antarctic Treaty that it covers is any area south of 60 degrees south. So when this ship reaches that location, we are covered under those provisions. This ship cannot burn heavy fuel south of 60 degrees. This ship cannot carry heavy fuel south of 60 degrees. So the captain and the engineers have calculated very carefully how much heavy fuel they have on board, and they will be burning that off before we get south of 60 degrees. When we are south of 60 degrees, please, no food on the outside decks. Saw some pictures of birds earlier. If the birds come in, if you're out on the deck with food, and that bird comes in, you're in violation of the Antarctic Treaty under the U.S. laws, because this company operates from a U.S. company, so they have a permit from the Environmental Protection Agency to come here. No waste over the sides. So please be careful if you're outside with a container with your coffee with a lid on it, please. Be careful the way the deck doesn't get blown off. No smoking on the outside decks when we're south of 60 degrees.
To this day, no commercial airlines fly over the Antarctic, even though flight times between some continents would make it many hours shorter. Only in 2011 was Sir Richard Branson able to get permission to run flights over the North Pole, saving several hours. Curiously, there are no reports of anyone ever circumnavigating the poles going from north and south. Also the same year, James Van Allen goes down to Antarctica, and the Van Allen belts is discovered 600 miles up. Now remember this, 600 miles up is the inner Van Allen belt. Now, in 1961, the nuclear test ban is lifted with Russia. Now, why would they lift the nuclear test ban with Russia? Look at this article from 1960. New York Times cost 5 cents back then. Friday, January 15th, 1960. President orders speed up in plans for super rocket. Now, this is a Saturn which they're building to sell the space program. And you see Mr. T. Keith Glenone is being the spokesperson. And then over here, Khrushchev says Soviets will cut forces a third, sees fantastic weapon. Strength is cited. Premier pins military stockpile on nuclear arms. Is that a scare tactic? Well, the capital thinks that The Russians are seeking to apply pressure. Now, folks, just in general, why would they lift the nuclear test ban be lifted in 1961 with Russia, which means they're working together, and then right after 1960, Khrushchev declares he's got a fantastic new weapon of nuclear arms? This doesn't make any sense at all unless it's a conspiracy, unless they were in partners, unless this is the controlled opposition so they could do the work they needed to do. So in the same year, 61, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, followed directly up by Alan Shepard, not to be outdone by the United States. Space race is on, but they're still doing these partnerships. So in 1962, we have Operation Dominic. 28,000 military personnel, over 200,000 tons of supplies. It was a series of 31 nuclear test explosions conducted in 1962 by the United States. It's called Operation Fishbowl. Get it? Turn a fishbowl upside down. What do you get? A dome. The Thor missile. What is Thor? Thor is the one that went up to the lightning bolts to the gods up in the heavens, to the dome. These shots were collectively called Operation Fishbowl, and all tests went off in the middle of the night. Again, were they trying to see what the dome was made of? There were 36 high-explosion thermonuclear tests conducted in just 5 months' time, and they were all rushed. You can hear about how they had to rush these rockets into space. Many of them failed. They had 266 fishbowl instruments, 10 ships, 80 stations, 156 on land, 16 aircraft, and 30 other stations. This was a big deal, folks. And then the Russians were doing the exact same thing with their Project K in 1961-62. High-altitude tests fired by missiles from Kaspustan Yar launch site. So what did they find up there? Well, one of the reports, quoting directly, is from the military. The electromagnetic pulse generated by a high-altitude nuclear explosion appeared to have very significant differences from the electromagnetic pulse generated by the nuclear explosions closer to the surface. Electromagnetic, positive, negative, cathode, diode. So this is exactly what Nikola Tesla was discovering. This is exactly what Nikola Tesla said he was practicing with his work on the directed energy weapons and the free energy for all. Now, Starfish Prime was launched, the highest one of all the launches. The Thor missile carrying the Starfish Prime, it went up over 680 miles, and it was detonated on its downward trajectory when it had fallen to the programmed altitude of 250 miles. Now, remember we said the Van Allen belt started at 600 miles? So wouldn't this seem like they ran into the dome, bounced down off of it, and had to destroy the missile at 250 miles because it had failed and hit the dome? That's just one speculation here, but we'll get into that more as well. Okay, so that's about a brief overview. And then right after 1963, Kennedy signs with the Russians again that they're not going to do any high-altitude testing anymore in 1963. So they do all the missile testing in 61, 62, 63. They declare that they're not going to do this anymore. So then all the NASA stuff came out and whatnot. So let's get into a little bit more about Operation High Jump, the history of Antarctica, and what the dome may possibly be made of. So upon first confronting the massive barrier, Captain Ross wrote of the wall, quote, "Extending from its eastern extreme point as far as the eye could discern to the eastward, it presented an extraordinary appearance, gradually increasing in height as we got nearer to it, and proving at length to be a perpendicular cliff of ice between 150 and 200 feet above the level of the sea, perfectly flat and level at the top, and without any fissures or promontories on its even seaward face. We might with equal chance of success try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as to penetrate such a mass." So the Antarctic expeditions began in 1773 with English Captain James Cook, who became the first modern explorer to have reached the Antarctic Circle and the ice barrier. During his 3 voyages over more than 3 years, he sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall. Then 70 years later, Captain James Clark Ross and his crew spent 4 years, 5 months, and sailed 2 heavily armored warships thousands of miles, losing many men from hurricanes and icebergs, looking for an entry point beyond the southern glacial wall, yet not finding one. The British ship Challenger at Ross's command completed the circuit of the southern region, traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times around the globe. So between these two ships, sailing over 125,000 miles, they would have gone around the Earth over 5 times, yet they never found the Antarctic inland passage they were looking for. Also, during Captain Ross's voyages, he often wrote in his journal how perplexed he was that they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside of their reckoning every day, some days as much as 29 miles. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition in the Antarctic in 1838 to 42, almost 4 years, and he spent exploring and surveying the Southern Ocean. In his journal, Lieutenant Wilkes also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. Also in Captain Ross's book, South Sea Voyages, he describes his experience in 1839 as his conclusion that the Earth must be motionless. He says, quote, "The sky being very clear, it enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, and a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also often been observed by former voyagers." Now, these men are dependent on the weather for their ships to move, so you know they're taking very, very accurate observational readings of the weather and the winds and whatnot. So he goes on to say, Count Strzelecki further informed me of the following seemingly anomalous circumstance, that at the height of 6,000 feet he found the current of air blowing at right angles to both the lower strata, also of a different hygrometric and thermometric condition, but warmer than the interstratum. Such a state of the atmosphere is compatible only with the fact which other evidence has demonstrated that the Earth is at rest. Side note, as Captain Cook unwittingly sowed the seeds of future exploration. However, with his detailed report of ample seal and whale populations in the Southern Ocean, hunters flocked to the area and drove seal populations to near extinction.
In the 1700s, this guy gets there. You get into the 1800s, they get closer and closer. And then when you get to the 1900s, that's where things get really interesting. Shackleton, this guy Shackleton goes down there on the, and I think I put this in my original blog. He goes down there on the name of the ship is the Nimrod. He goes down there, the Nimrod, and it's called the Nimrod Expedition. I'm like, seriously? Okay, Nimrod's goal was to reach into heaven, right? Yeah, the Nimrod Expedition. So you can click on the link I got there and read all about the Nimrod Expedition, British Antarctic Expedition, otherwise known as the Nimrod Expedition. And it was on the name of the ship was the Nimrod right here. Okay, Nimrod was trying to reach into heaven by going up. Could it be that these guys are trying to go out, try to find the ground floor? I don't know, but I mean, why do you? And this is what really got me is they did so in 1908. 1908. I'm like, really? 1908? Seriously? 1908 is when Nimrod was born, according to my other. Let me see. What I put in here. This is one of my other blogs. Yeah. Okay. The 350 post-flood years of Noah's life. This is a chart I did last year, and the follow-up chart, the Nimrod-Abraham timeline. Nimrod was born in 1908 AM, or years since creation. And then 1908, see, 1907 to 1909, well, that's 1908. Nimrod went to Antarctica. I'm like, I mean, you can't write this stuff. I mean.
So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year, to the bottom of the world, because the government has really become interested.
Well, Admiral Byrd, I can understand, I think everybody can, the interest in the North Pole because it's so near our greatest challenger, Soviet Russia, but why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
No, it's pretty cold. There's only one permanent resident, that's the emperor penguin. The little ones live further north. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime, because it happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources. And you know, as the world shrinks with an ever-increasing acceleration, far-flung places once useless, like we thought the North Pole was, and no man's land, become very useful. The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
So let's take a quick little sidebar on Admiral Byrd. His first expedition began in 1928, involving 2 ships and 3 airplanes for what was declared a photographic expedition and geological surveys. After the first winter, the expeditions resumed, and on November 28, 1929, Byrd made his famous flight to the South Pole and back. As a result of his fame, he was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral by a special act of Congress on winter solstice, December 21st, 1929. He was only 41 years old and the youngest admiral in the history of the United States Navy. So on his second expedition in 1934, he spent 5 winter months alone operating a meteorological station at an advanced base camp, from which he narrowly escaped with his life after suffering carbon monoxide poisoning from a poorly ventilated stove, as chronicled here in the New York Times. Now, I just want to ask the question, why would a newly minted admiral, one of the most famous men in the world, spend months in a shack in temperatures to minus 80 degrees, alone by himself, where just years before he almost died, to man a meteorological station? Does this job require one of the most famous men on Earth at the time? This doesn't make any sense to me at all. So the United States Antarctic Service Expedition was from 1939 to 1941. It was Admiral Byrd's 3rd Antarctic expedition, jointly sponsored by the Navy, State Department, Department of Interior, and the Treasury. Everybody was involved. Also, it was sponsored by donations and gifts from private citizens, corporations, institutions. One of those, of course, is the Rockefellers. We can read on the trip here that a total of 125 men departed from the United States in 2 ships. And the objectives of the expedition were outlined in an order from Roosevelt dated in 1939. The president wanted 2 bases to be established. And then we can read back that in 1939, the New York Times quoted, President Roosevelt moved to prevent possible extension of Germany's claims to Antarctic areas. He sent Byrd to leave in October for the sphere of influence of the Monroe Doctrine. It is apparent that this government was prepared to take the position, if necessary, that any attempts by foreign powers to establish bases west of the 180th meridian in the Antarctic would be considered an unfriendly act. So they're making the case that the Germans going down in 39 also, they were racing down there at the same exact time, but they never did see each other and never did come close. They seem to be very real and present danger, but we find that through Germany's presence, the land of everlasting mystery was publicized reasons for Byrd's hurry-up expedition, and at no time did he take command or any attempt to observe what the German expedition was up to. So that sounds like it was just a ruse. Also, this little article in the back pages of the New York Times, November 30th, 1939, secret orders taken on Byrd's polar trip. Rear Admiral Byrd joined the Vanguard expedition at the Panama Canal with confidential orders from the White House. Officials say the orders were a State Department secret. Even the existence of the orders, authorities said, had been kept secret. Admiral Byrd received them, informants say, on a hurried trip to Washington last week before departing to Panama. It is possible that these, quote, secret orders contain the real reason for Admiral Byrd's expedition. I know was the fact that the Germans were also conducting a secret expedition in Antarctica make the Admiral's real reason for putting together the American expedition a matter of utmost importance? Could both expeditions have been carrying secret orders to explore unknown lands beyond the pole were the Americans and Germans involved in 1939 in a race to first gain entrance and explore the legendary lands inside our Earth? All right, so let's get a little more into the expedition from the Nazis in 1939 to 41. Did the Nazis have a secret Antarctic focus or fortress? And we can read down that there was a peer-reviewed study by Colin Summerhays, a geologist and oceanographer with the Scott Polar Research Institute. So immediately, since the Antarctic Treaty system is in place, no one's been allowed to go on Antarctic without military government approval out of the United States. We immediately must suspect this as a source of quality research and information. And Peter Beijing, a journalist. This was a 21-page myth-busting juggernaut printed in the scholarly journal Polar Record. The German Antarctic Expedition and Base. In 1938, they sent a large team of explorers to the Queen Maud region of Antarctica. They discovered a vast network of warm water rivers and caves. One of these caves extended down as far as 20 to 30 miles and contained a large geothermal lake. The cave was explored and construction teams were sent in to build city-sized bases dubbed Base 211 or New Berlin that hosted the SS, the Thule Society, serpent cults, various Nazi occultists, the Illuminati, and other shadowy groups. Remember, this is a peer-reviewed study, folks. At some point, the Germans either discovered abandoned alien technology or made contact with extraterrestrial explorers, variously described as greys or reptilians. They learned or were taught how to replicate the alien technology and used it to begin developing a number of super weapons, including an advanced aircraft called an anti-gravity disc or flying saucer. While many of these weapons were not ready for use in war, the base had the ability to manufacture these weapons. Now, the survey says that in 1938 to 1939, the Schwabenland and its goal was to scout new territory for expanding German whaling industry. Now, this makes total sense since they were desperate for oil, and the whaling business down there was picking up greatly. But even if they had wanted to, it's not likely that the Schwabenland crew could have built even a small base, let alone the one the size of a small city. According to the ship's logs, they were only there for a month.
Okay, let's pick up the scenario. We were originally talking about the spiriting out of the two spacecraft out of Berlin before the Allies arrived. We said that they were put aboard two submarines. They spent 6 months at sea, and they finally landed in Argentina. Now, from that point, they were taken into Antarctica, into a section of Antarctica called Queen Maud's Land. And there they disappeared, and they were not heard of for some time. Now, intelligence sources, and of course I was in the intelligence business at that time with the agency, reports indicated that they were in there and they were operative once again. Now, there was a major concern by world powers to go in and capture the technology and the two spacecraft which they knew were in Antarctica. And the intelligence reports indicated that one known as Admiral Byrd was to be recommissioned, and he was to be sent in there to retrieve the two saucers and also the technology and personnel associated with it. Later reports indicated that Admiral Byrd was given 8 months and unlimited funding to go in and pull this thing successfully off. But we also know that within 8 weeks he was totally defeated. Now, the supposition at that point was that there was an advanced civilization and technology, most probably alien. There were with the Third Reich and the SS who was in Antarctica, and that those great and developed technologies were used to defeat Admiral Byrd.
Then curiously, around the same time, actually in the 45, the British had Operation Tabarin. They were claiming South Shetland, South Orkney. They put bases down in the Falkland Islands, and they decided they needed a permanent area to monitor Nazi activity in Antarctica, Argentina, and Chile. A secret military operation, Operation Tabarin, was launched by the Royal Navy and established bases throughout the islands. Then it goes on to say, debunking it, for one thing, the summer of 45, Hitler was dead and Germans had surrendered to the Allies. For another, the SSS was disbanded in October and wasn't reestablished until a few years later. Deterrence and spying were not stated goals. The base crews consisted mainly of wireless radio operators and government scientists, consisted only of 13 people. So we totally debunked that story. The next one we come into is Operation High Jump, which began in 46 and 47. When the British failed to expel the Germans from Antarctica, the U.S. launched Operation High Jump in 1946 to destroy the German base. The ground and air forces were fought back by Germany's flying saucers, and the base was finally obliterated by 3 nuclear bomb strikes. The flying saucers that have been sighted in the U.S. since then are Nazi spy craft. I mean, this is pretty ridiculous coming from a peer-reviewed scholarly study. And as we'll get into, if a German base in Antarctica was the real target of Operation High Jump, its planners were lacking some very basic map reading skills. By all accounts, the supposed Navy cave was under Queen Maud Land somewhere, but High Jump was based on the Ross Ice Shelf on the opposite side of the continent. So let's get more into Operation High Jump. Regarding Operation High Jump, it seems incredible that so short after World War II, that had decimated most of Europe and crippled world economies, an expedition to Antarctica was undertaken with so much haste, at such cost, and with so much military hardware, unless something of a very large imminent threat to mankind was taking place. Operation High Jump was, and to this day still is, the largest Antarctic expedition ever organized. It included a British-Norwegian force, a Russian force, Australian and Canadian forces were also involved. Keep in mind as we go through the details that Operation High Jump was supposed to last 6 to 8 months with sailors overwintering on Antarctica, yet all 3 task forces returned just after 6 weeks. No one is sure why this happened, and still to this day. So in 1946, according to Paul Sipple, it was Byrd who persuaded the Secretary of Navy James Forrestal and Chief of Naval Operations Chester Nimitz into launching a huge naval expedition to the Antarctic. Please keep in mind that Admiral Byrd was a 33-degree Mason going down to establish a New Zealand Freemason Lodge 777 in Antarctica in its previous expedition in 1939-41. Another close ally was Richard Byrd's brother, Harry Flood Byrd, then a head of a powerful family machine that ran the Democratic Party. Harry had a high degree of clout on the Hill, and many presidents, particularly new presidents with shaky popularity, embraced him. So in 1946, U.S. Admiral D.C. Ramsey created the Antarctic Development Project, and the code name was named Operation High Jump. Admiral Byrd's comments in the press release on November 12, 1946, stated clearly that, quote, "The purpose of the operation was primarily military in nature, that is to train Navy personnel, test ships, planes, and equipment under frigid zone conditions." So in 1947, Operation High Jump, they had 2 months to prepare. Tentative plans would establish an American base on the Ross Ice Shelf. A central objective of the project was stated like the German official story for the aerial mapping of as much of Antarctica as possible, particularly the coastline. The U.S. Navy strongly emphasized that Operation High Jump was going to be a Navy show. Ramsey's preliminary orders of August 26, 1946 stated that, quote, "The Chief of Naval Operations only will deal with other government agencies, and no diplomatic negotiations are required, and no foreign observers will be accepted." However, headlines in the New York Times declared a 6-nation race to Antarctica, quote, "set off by reports of uranium deposits," end quote. The article in the Times went on to charge that the British was leading the race by sending a secret expedition to occupy Byrd's East Base. Actually, the British had been active in Antarctica for a number of years previous to that. Commanders of the Pacific and Atlantic fleets were each to designate 6 ships for the expedition. The flagship was USS Mount Olympus, which came from the Atlantic Fleet. The expedition was supported by a large naval force designated Task Force 68, its commander Richard H. Cruzen. Besides the flagship and the newly commissioned aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, which was still going shakedown trials, there were 13 U.S. Navy support ships, 6 helicopters, 6 flying boats, 2 seaplane tenders, and 15 other aircraft. Included were comprised of some 4,700 military personnel and 3 dog sled teams on board. For 2 months in October and November of 1946, swift preparations went underway. Operation High Jump necessitated the filling of many posts with men who had no previous polar exploration. It was possible to obtain only the services of 11 veterans of the previous U.S. Antarctic expeditions. Only 2 pilots in the central group of the task force had experience in flying photographic missions. As a matter of fact, none of the seaplane pilots or the flight crews had ever flown in Antarctica before. With all the turmoil, Captain Reese of the USS Mount Olympus wrote in exasperation to Admiral Cruzen, quote, "Details as to the nature of the operation are completely unknown. It is therefore urgently requested that this vessel be informed at once as to what special equipment, instruments, clothing the ship must obtain in the limited time remaining. The ship cannot be considered a smart ship." Also, the U.S. carrier USS Philippine Sea had completed its shakedown cruise only weeks before, yet now the ship and its crew were expected to launch the largest planes ever sent from a carrier deck, quite possibly under extreme weather conditions. The Navy's icebreaker USS Burton Island was still undergoing basic sea trials and training off the California coast. This meant that during the earliest and possibly most crucial stages of the expedition, Cruzen and his untrained men would have to rely solely on the Northwind icebreaker to get 4 thin-skinned ships of the central group through the ice pack and into the Ross Sea. Not only that, but if any of the ships from the eastern or western groups ran into trouble, only the Northwind icebreaker would be able to assist. If Northwind should become disabled, the entire central group could be left helplessly for weeks deep in the Ross Sea, certain prey for icebergs and crushing pack ice. The information was frightening. Temperatures were far colder in the Arctic regions, and the flyers could fall prey to an empty, inhuman landscape which no one could be expected to survive. Traditional navigational aids were of little help, as the Mercator projections were of no use due to the convergence of meridians at high altitudes and the consequent distortions of the areas between parallels. Thus, a grid system would have to be used. So what they're saying here is the maps they had of a global Earth were of no use, and they had to use a grid system. Isn't that interesting? The official press release by Byrd seemed to confirm their anxiety, as was justified as an extension of the Navy's, quote, "policy of developing the ability of Navy forces to operate under any and all climatic conditions." Now, as stated, this mission was put together in a hurry, and they came with this device, this a snowcat called a snow cruiser. And it was built, the cruiser was designed by Dr. Thomas Poulter. Dr. Poulter suggested the machine could carry a Navy pursuit plane, which by making short flights at 300-mile intervals could explore some 5,000 square miles of unknown territory during a single Antarctic summer. Now, you got to take a look at this machine. It was well publicized all over the country at the time that they were going down to make this journey. Here's the snowcat with a plane that was going to fly off of it. So obviously they were set to explore as much as they could. Here's in the test trials, it gets high-sided. And you can see they made a big publicity out of it. They took it on tour from Chicago to New York. People came from all over to look at it. So it was a very, very big deal. And if you look down here, here's the operating, and you can notice the plywood. It's very kind of bare bones. Temperatures down to -80, and this equipment's going to be working. You can see it going across a bridge here, and I wanted to show you how it is loaded onto the plane, loaded onto the boat. The vehicle is, and then the plane sits on top of that. So this was loaded up, and it was sent down to Antarctica on one of the 3 ships. Here's Admiral Byrd getting off the ship, and here's it loaded up and ready to go. And in addition, we can read that they disclosed plans for the expedition. They were taking 6 Army tanks, as well as the 45,000-pound snow cruiser. The snow cruiser would carry 4 men in a plane and would be extremely mobile and easy to manipulate, they predicted. The tires alone weighed 1,900 pounds, made by Goodyear Tire and Rubber, were 10 feet tall and the largest ever manufactured. However, we read down, we find that for months, Americans had read every tiny detail about the progress of the manufacturing the beast. The delivery was like coming out of a circus parade, and those close enough to travel to be publicized route lined the highways. But after the outpost on wheels was reported to have made it safely down to Antarctica, from this point on, the snow cruiser was never mentioned again. I've spent many hours searching through back issues of newspapers and indexes, and after the final report, and found nothing. Over the next 4 weeks, the planes down in Antarctica spent 220 hours in the air, flying a total of 22,700 miles and taking 70,000 aerial photographs. Then the mission that had been expected to last 6 to 8 months came to an early and faltering end. A Chilean newspaper reported that the mission had, quote, run into trouble, and, quote, there had been many fatalities. These aircraft, ships were absolutely fully loaded. Antarctica-bound planes would make the risky 6-hour flight to Little America. To assist the planes in takeoff from the narrow flight deck of the USS Philippine aircraft carrier, JATO, J-A-T-O, or jet-assisted takeoff bottles filled with jet fuel would be attached under the wings and ignited just seconds after the plane began to roll, thereby dramatically increasing the speed necessary for takeoff. The R-4D planes were the heaviest aircraft ever to launch from a carrier. Now think of that for a sec. They had just come out of World War II with all the aircraft carriers and all the planes launched, and here they were launching the heaviest aircraft ever to launch from a carrier. What were they loaded with? Not just cameras, folks. So why so much payload carrying never before attempted risk unless they needed to be prepared for anything exploring beyond the ice walls? They had only 400 feet of takeoff to work with from the flight deck, otherwise their wide wingspan would collide with the carrier's superstructure. On Antarctica, there were no airways, no weather report stations, no convenient alternate airports. They were in fact extremely fortunate if they found any charts at all available for the operation. With all these facts in mind, some air pilots began to regret their decisions to become intrepid Antarctic explorers. Here's a quote from one sailor on board. Quote, the greatest achievement of Operation High Jump was the acquisition of 70 aerial photographs, but it was expected to be a mapmaker's dream turned out to be a cartographic nightmare when a large percent of the photographs were rendered useless due to the lack of adequate ground control points. The American political environment of 46 also played a valuable role in Operation High Jump. Many political debates around the country focused on the merits of a single unified military command under a single Department of National Defense. In UFO conspiracy theories, Majestic 12, or MJ-12, is the code name of an alleged secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials that was formed in 1947 by an executive order by U.S. Harry Truman to facilitate recovery and investigation of alien spacecraft. Just 4 months prior to Operation High Jump, we had the Roswell incident occur in Nevada. So in mid-1947, the United Air Force surveillance balloon crashed at New Mexico, prompting claims alleging the crash was an extraterrestrial spaceship. On March 5th, 1947, El Mercurio newspaper of San Diego had a headline, quote, on board the Mount Olympus on high seas, which quoted Byrd in an interview with Lee Van Atta. Quote, Admiral Byrd declared today that there was imperative for the United States to initiate immediate defense measures against hostile regions. Furthermore, Byrd stated that he didn't want to frighten anyone unduly, end quote, but that it was, quote, a better reality than in case of a new war, the continental United States would be attacked by flying objects which could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds, end quote. Interestingly, not long before he made these comments, Byrd recommended defense bases at the North Pole. Admiral Byrd repeated each of these points of view, resulting, as he described, in his, quote, personal knowledge gathered both at the North and South Poles before a news conference held for the International News Service. He was shortly after that hospitalized and was not allowed to hold any more press conferences. Still, in March of 1955, some 7 years later, he was placed in charge of Operation Deep Freeze, which was part of the International Geophysical Year from 1957 to 58 exploration of the Antarctic. He died shortly thereafter in 1957. Many have suggested that he was murdered. So what we see is a very well coordinated effort between the Germans, the Majestic 12 Naval Oversight Committee, and Admiral Byrd and Roswell to create this UFO phenomenon that has only increased to this day. So was this to hide the true operations of finding the dome with Operation High Jump? The next year, after the massive operation of Operation High Jump, which was, as I said before, went down, alleged to go down for 6 to 8 months, but ended up being there only 6 to 7 weeks, all three task forces turned around. They sent another mission down called Operation Windmill in 1948. This expedition consisted of 500 men headed by Commander Gerald L. Ketchum of Task Force 39, 3 military officers, 10 civilians from various branches of the armed services and civilian government agencies accompanied the expedition and as well as observers and scientists. The objectives put forth by the Chief of Naval Operations, again, was similar to Operation High Jump. The official story was to investigate conditions, personnel testing equipment in cold weather, etc. But there's an interesting note here that the expedition was also instructed to investigate conditions of electromagnetic propagation. This could very well be the true mission, to find the edge where the Earth meets the electromagnetic dome that encases all of the flat Earth. We'll go much deeper into this aspect later, but Nikola Tesla had discovered and developed what is known as the Tesla shield, an impregnable electromagnetic dome of energy, back when he was alive in the 1920s. And it's very interesting to compare Tesla's shield with the electromagnetic plasma dome of flat Earth. Also, just a side note, to tilt at windmills, because Operation High Jump, we're making the case that it was to get above the ice wall and to investigate the dome. Operation Windmill, to tilt at windmills, means to attack imaginary enemies, to go on a wild goose chase, to persistently engage in a futile activity. Now, was this Operation Windmill as part of the UFO operation to deceive? So after that, in 1949, U.S. Commander James Forrestal, who was a cabinet-level United States Secretary of Navy and the first United States Secretary of Defense, goes into Bethesda Naval Hospital from exhaustion in 1949, and he seems to be recovering, having gained 12 pounds since his entry. Yet in the early morning of May 22nd, his body, clad only in the bottom half of a pair of pajamas, was found on the 3rd floor below the 16th floor kitchen across the hall from his room. He was said to have committed suicide by leaping from the 16th floor. Another one suicided, it appears. So we have Operation Deep Freeze beginning in 1956, where they built 71 permanent base stations around the perimeter of the Antarctic Circle, which likely was HARP installations, which we'll get into later. Operation Deep Freeze continued supplying the Antarctic for the next 50 years until naval operations ended in 2006. In 1957, 33-degree Freemason Admiral Byrd dies, as we mentioned earlier, and the Russians launch the Sputnik, and the Space Cold War begins. Also in 1957, at the same time, the International Geophysical Year, or IGY, is created. 12 countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, volunteered to establish 56 research sites in Antarctica. These countries initially settled on an international, quote, gentleman's agreement to suspend political claims and differences during the program. So we are to believe that at the behest of the U.S., 12 countries agreed to a gentleman's agreement with the Soviets, who the House on Un-American Committee, also known as HUAC, headed by Joseph McCarthy, was prosecuting Americans for being communist sympathizers from 1947 through 1957, yet they were now entering into gentlemen's agreements over Antarctica. Yeah, right. In an attempt to avoid further complications, the story goes, the U.S. invited 11 other countries to a conference to negotiate the freedom of scientific investigation. IGY, beginning in June 1958, had 12 countries meeting informally in 60-plus sessions to work out details of the international treaty. IGY triggered a 1.5-year science expedition. The International Council of Scientific Unions, the parent body, had more than 70 existing national scientific organizations forming the IGY committees. This was the impetus that began the formation of the Antarctic Treaty System in 1958 to control all access to the Antarctica, which still exists to this day. 1958, coincidentally, was the year United Nations was formed, as well as NASA. On July 29, 1955, James C. Haggerty, president of Dwight D. Eisenhower's press secretary, announced that the United States intended to launch, quote, small Earth circling satellites between July 1, 1957 through December 31, 1958, as their part in the contribution to IGY. IGY activities literally span the globe from the North to the South Poles. Although much of the work was carried out in the Arctic and equatorial regions, special attention was given to the Antarctic. Now think about this for a minute. The Russians and the United States both began launching satellites in union with the IGY in 1957-58, yet the world is being told or sold that the space race was beginning because the Russians had launched a man into space. Does this make any sense to anyone? The only way it makes sense if there was collusion, conspiracy, and cooperation to begin a fake space war so that NASA, as I said, also created in 1958, could be put forth along with it so the future fake moon missions and exploring of space can continue the hoax to this day. Other significant achievements of the IGY included the discovery of the Van Allen belt radiation. James Van Allen played a very important role in the planning of the 57-58 IGY and carried out shipboard expeditions to Greenland and southward to the Ross Sea shelf off the coast of Antarctica in 1957. IGY culminated in January 31st, 1958 with the launch of Explorer 1 and its scientific payload. The discovery marked the birth of the research field of magnetospheric physics, an enterprise that grew to involve more than 1,000 investigators in more than 20 countries. Was this magnetospheric physics part of looking for the electromagnetic dome? And just to add insult to injury, they created the International Council for Science, also known as the Scientific Community of Antarctic Research, or SCAR. Now take a look at this logo they use. It's the Antarctic with a circle around it, the Antarctic Circle. They're throwing it in our face. They also remind us in song that even 1999, Donald Fagen of Steely Dan recorded the song IGY for the International Geographical Year with lyrics like this. Sarah von Braun ran NASA's Saturn rocket program from the first Mercury missions through the alleged Apollo missions to the moon. Just as NASA was beginning to be developed to allegedly counter the Russians, who were said to be the first in space, resulting in the Great Space Race, von Braun had plenty of time to go to Hollywood and collaborate with Paramount Pictures and Walt Disney to sell space travel to the public. Man of Space was the pre-programming of the public to accept vast sums of expenditures to counter the Cold War evil empire. It is common knowledge that before coming to NASA, von Braun was the wunderkind leader of the V-2 or Vengeance 2 rocket program for the Germans during World War II. According to a 2011 BBC documentary, the attacks resulted in the deaths of an estimated 9,000 civilians and military personnel, while 12,000 forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners were killed producing the weapons. So let's get back to the beginnings of NASA in 1958, where every photo and every story of space exploration has come from for over the past 50 years. The first NASA administrator in 1958 was Dr. Thomas Keith Glennon. Previously to NASA, he was the studio manager for 10 years at Paramount Studios in Hollywood. Then from 1942 to 47, he was administrator and director of the U.S. Naval Underwater Sound Laboratory and then after the war was production manager for the photographic film manufacturing company Ansco, also known as GAF. His work in movie making and underwater photography came in handy to fake the Apollo moon missions and spacewalks. Here is the massive underwater neutral buoyancy laboratory in Houston, Texas, which is said to facilitate astronauts with near weightlessness in space, but has been used for decades to facilitate fake space moon footage. Secret societies have been part of the occult or hidden hand of preserving the great lie since the beginning. How cool or powerful it would be for secret societies' recruiting purposes if you could tell your new first 3 Degree Blue members that Buzz Aldrin, the second man we are sold had stepped on the moon, had planted a Scottish Rite Freemason flag on there. From George Washington and his laying of the cornerstones of the White House to many U.S. presidents like Harry S. Truman, many have been Freemasons. So to fake an Apollo moon landing, one Kenneth or Kenny S. Kleinecht managed the Apollo space missions from the beginning until retiring to Lockheed Corp in 1981. He is a 33-degree Mason, and for his great work at NASA and the Apollo fake moon missions, he then became the sovereign Grand Commander and titular head of all Scottish Rite Masons throughout the world. Make no mistake, the powers that run NASA are co-joined, run, and controlled by the military and secret societies of the New World Order, and always have been in modern times. Using Hollywood, whose name comes from the holly tree used by the ancient Druids for black magic, as well as known celebrities to promote their sun-worshipping Horus snake ways, as they show off their serpent tongues to mock those without eyes to see or ears to hear the hidden truth about what is really going on in our world today. There is one more critical piece to the founding of NASA. Jack Whiteside Parsons, who JPL, Jack Parsons Laboratories, was named, was considered the father of rocketry. Also joining him were some very nefarious characters in the founding of NASA. We see the complete dream team here of Aleister Crowley, a very well-known occultist, dark magic, black magic person. Jack Parsons, who we just mentioned. R. Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology. Werner von Braun, V-2 rocket program, Nazi Germany, and the fantasy creator Walt Disney. Now, looking at Whiteside Parsons, he was an occultist, black magician, Satanist, head of Ordo Templi Orientis California Agape Lodge. Crowley, 33-degree Freemason, leader of the Ordo Templi Orientis, black magician, Satanist, the Beast 666. L. Ron Hubbard, mass mind controller, black magician, Satanist, founder of the Church of Scientology cult. Werner von Braun, who we talked about, and Mr. Walt Disney, who everybody knows about, who's also a known Illuminati and helped with the pedophile Magic Kingdom 33 and all the underground caves at Disney and the mind control programming. So it's quite a group that founded NASA here. Additionally, in 1958, we find that the first solar panels were created. Again, the Arctic Treaty System was founded. The United Nations was founded. Few know that the U.S. deployed atomic weapons, or said to have deployed atomic weapons in 1958 in Korea at the end of the Korean War, again, probably to promote the Red Scare. And then just we have the Van Allen Belt discovery by satellite explorers 1 and 3. And then very interestingly, the United States completed 6 high-altitude nuclear tests in 1958, but they raised a number of questions. According to the U.S. government report, quote, previous high-altitude nuclear tests, the Teak, the Orange, and the Yucca, plus 3 Argus shots were poorly instrumented and hastily executed. Despite thorough studies of the meager data, present models of these bursts are sketchy and tentative. When they got up to the Van Allen belts, did they lose communications? 1961, nuclear test ban is lifted with Russia to test high-altitude weapons. Now, why did they lift the ban when we're beginning to enter into a space race? The Antarctic Treaty System is ratified and signed. The ASPA, which is the Antarctic Special Protection Agency, could be protecting the HARP facilities down there. JFK announces space mission to the moon. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. Alan Shepard, the first American in space in a 15-minute suborbital flight. and few are aware that Russia is said to have launched an Explorer probe to Venus, and even fewer are aware that in a speech, J.F. Kennedy stated that there's already a satellite from the United States heading to Venus in 1961.
To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time in manned flight. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade we shall make up and move ahead. This is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. New ignorance, new problems, new dangers.
So, nuking the dome, 1962, Operation Dominic. Operation Dominic was a series of 31 nuclear test explosions conducted in 1962. It occurred during a period of the high Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Also, the Bay of Pigs invasion had occurred just recently and was on the minds as well. Khrushchev announced the end of the 3-year moratorium on nuclear testing on August 30th, 1961, and immediately thereafter, on September 1st, he initiated a series of tests that included the initiation of SAR bombs up into the upper atmosphere. Kennedy responded immediately by authorizing Operation Dominic, the largest nuclear weapons testing program ever conducted by the United States, and the last atmospheric test series conducted by the U.S., as a limited test ban treaty was signed in Moscow the following year. So this small window, they start blasting up in space with thermonuclear weapons. What were they doing? Why were they doing this? What were they trying to find? Dominic was the largest and most elaborate testing operation ever conducted. The diagnostic stations receiving data from the test covered more than 15 million square miles, 28,000 military and civilian personnel, 200 tons of supplies were shipped and airlifted to the test areas. This was a major operation, just like down to the Antarctic. The Thor missile was used to lift warheads into near space to conduct the high-altitude nuclear test explosions. These shots were collectively called Operation Fishbowl. Now, do you remember in your mythology who Thor was? You may recall that Thor in ancient Nordic mythology is the red-bearded son of Odin, of the Norse Hercules, and he's armed with his war hammer and a belt of strength, and he tends to flatten whatever grows inflated beyond natural limits, particularly greedy giants. His chariot is pulled by the goats, Toothgrinder and Snarltooth, and his lightning is located in the place of might. Thor safeguards important demarcations while breaking open those that unduly block or limit.
Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C. Look up Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C, from the late Latin name Dominicus, meaning of the Lord. Fishbowl was part of Operation Dominic. It looks like they are sending high-altitude nuclear bombs to test the fishbowl of the Lord, i.e., the firmament. Yeah, this is definitely one of those things to make you go, Now, check this out. If you click on Operation Fishbowl, we learn about Operation Fishbowl here. It was a series of high-altitude nuclear tests in 1962 that were carried out by the United States as part of the larger Operation Dominic nuclear test program. Now, hold that thought. This is all happening. If you go and look on the Operation Dominic entry, you see the different dates. We're 1962. This is the early part of 1962. We're talking May. I mean, look at all these bombs going off. 25 April, 1962, 27 April, 2 May, 4 May, 6 May, 8 May, 9 May, 11 May, 11 May, 12 May, 14 May, 19, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is all before President Kennedy's "Let's go out in the space" speech. But I think a lot of people don't realize that our first stop wasn't the moon.
even before we went to the moon, they were sending probes all of a sudden after all of this. Okay, keep the timeline in mind. Operation High Jump, Operation Deep Freeze, Byrd dies, NASA's founded, Antarctic Treaty signed, Operation Dominic and Fishbowl take effect. And if you notice during President Kennedy's speech, he was talking about that they've already got probes headed to Venus. Wait a minute. We're already sending stuff to Venus and Mars? We haven't even been to the moon yet. Authors are claiming, and I think it's a reasonable claim, that, you know, if that model is true, then we know we have a circle, the circle of the Earth as described in the Bible, surrounded by Antarctica, the outer rim, that has a 200 or 300 foot ice wall, cliff, that keeps everything in, hence Operation High Jump. You got to get over that, right? So it looks like, at least from the flat earther perspective, that probably during Operation Deep Freeze, they may have found the edge of the dome, presumably anywhere from 800 to 1,200 miles inland from the coast. Then everybody pulls out, signs this treaty, says nobody can go back except under the express guidelines of the international community that signed the treaty. So then all of a sudden the United States and Russia engaged in these high altitude nuclear tests, and the United States calls theirs Operation Dominic, within which we have Operation Fishbowl.
In the exact same time period, Russia is also testing the dome. The Soviet Union's K project was a group of 5 nuclear tests conducted in 1961-62. They were all high-altitude tests fired by missiles of the Kasputin Yar launch site in Russia. Operation Fishbowl was 10 shots within 5 months. Operation Fishbowl was to be bluegill, starfish, and orca. If the tests were to fail, the next attempt of the same test would be of the same name plus the word prime. They were intent on testing the dome. The first planned test of Fishbowl was June 2nd, 1962. No nuclear detonation occurred, no data was obtained. So continuing from 1958, they're having rockets go out and just lose their way, and instruments go haywire and they have to detonate it. We see this time again. Operation Starfish, June 19th, 1962. Missile flew a normal trajectory for 59 seconds and the rocket engine suddenly stopped. The range officer ordered the destruction of the missile. Some of the missile's parts fell on Johnston Island. Some of the debris was contaminated with plutonium. Lovely. Starfish Prime. The Thor missile, this is important, the Thor missile carrying the Starfish Prime warhead actually reached an apogee, maximum height, of just over 680 miles. Remember that, 680 miles. And the warhead was detonated on its downward trajectory when it had fallen to the programmed altitude of 250 miles. Now, why would you send something up 680 miles and detonate it down at 250 miles? Now, also note that all of these tests were conducted at night, mostly at midnight, in the dark of night. They wanted to see what was up there. Starfish Prime, this is very important too, Starfish Prime caused an electromagnetic pulse which was far larger than expected, so much larger that it drove much of the instrumentation off the scale, causing great difficulty in getting accurate measurements. The pulse also made effects known to the public by causing electrical damage in Hawaii some 900 miles away from the detonation point, knocking out 300 streetlights, setting off numerous burglar alarms, damaging telephone, microwave links. They had microwave back then, folk, 1961. The visible phenomena due to the burst were widespread and quite intense. A very large area of the Pacific was illuminated by the auroral phenomenon. Resonant scattering of light from lithium, another wonderful metal raining down on us, and other debris was observed at Johnson and French frigate shoals for many days, confirming the long-time presence of debris in the atmosphere. The Starfish Prime radiation belt persisted at high altitude for many months and damaged United States satellites. All of these satellites failed completely within several months of the Starfish detonation. So we have an electromagnetic pulse that's sending all communication devices haywire, and they're having to destroy and fail all of their satellites and missiles. All right, so as of the beginning of 2011, the EMP waveforms and prompt gamma radiation outputs for bluegill triple prime, they had to get to triple prime, and their testing. In an unclassified report, however, a subsequent theory, which is now one being used, was developed, which describes the mechanism by which the high-altitude EMP is generated. Data to confirm the EMP theory is still classified. A very large number of United States military ships were operating in support of Prime. In addition, they had some guests. An uninvited scientific expeditionary ship from the Soviet Union was stationed near Johnston Island for the test, and another Soviet scientific expeditionary ship was located in the southern Kunjgat region. They were working together, folks. This is very important too. The electromagnetic pulse generated by a high-altitude nuclear explosion appeared to have very significant differences from the electromagnetic pulse generated by the nuclear explosions closer to the surface. So something up high changed the profile of the electromagnetic patterns. It was known from previous high-altitude tests as well as from theoretical work done in the 50s that high-altitude nuclear tests produce a number of unique geophysical phenomena at the opposite end of the magnetic field line of the Earth's magnetic field. So then in 1963, they quickly signed with the Russians. The Nuclear Air Test Ban Treaty is signed, prohibiting all test detonations of nuclear weapons except underground. Shortly thereafter, JFK is assassinated. How convenient. Nikola Tesla. There is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment. So if you recall that the test that was successful, they called successful, the triple starfish or star prime, ran up to 600 miles and then it was detonated at 250 miles and was deemed a success. Not so coincidentally, James Van Allen, who'd gone out to Antarctica, also created the Van Allen belt, and guess what? Starts at 600 miles and goes up to 60,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, or some 3,600 miles. The belt contained energetic electrons and protons. Also, interestingly, in 2013, NASA reported that the Van Allen probes had discovered a transient third radiation belt, which was observed for 4 weeks until it's destroyed by a powerful interplanetary shockwave. So we have the Van Allen belts at the exact same start as where the missile Starfish Prime bounced off of.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
So let's explore the Van Allen belts a little bit more and the magnetosphere. Here we have a picture of the sun allegedly with the Earth, and then we have the magnetosphere, which they cutely in their CGI decided to draw it like a spider. And if you go down to this here, we learn a little more that from the sun towards the Earth to a distance of 62,000 miles away, the outer space starts an interaction with the solar wind, where there's a collision breaking and deflecting a large amount of high-energy electromagnetic waves. This shock in the magnetosphere converts a large amount of kinetic energy into heat, forming a layer of hot, dense plasma at temperatures of, get this folks, 150,000 degrees Kelvin, called the magnetosheath. 150,000 degrees Kelvin. Well, how much temperature is that? So we take 150,000 degrees Kelvin, we convert to Fahrenheit, and what they're telling us up there at the end of the edge of the magnetosphere, at the magnetic sheath, it is 269,540 degrees. Are you kidding me, folks? So this is where the astronauts have to pass through to get to the moon and beyond. This is where all the satellites have to go. Space shuttle is much lower at 130 miles, so it's not being affected. But 269,540 degrees. Yeah, right. So this is an article from 11/27/2014. Invisible plasma shield which protects Earth from radiation discovered 7,200 miles above the planet. Now remember, we said that the Van Allen belt was somewhere right above there, and all of a sudden now, all these years later, decades later, they're discovering a new invisible plasma shield. Whoa, let's find out what that is about. All right, so the exposure to such high energy radiation can harm satellites. We know that. Despite their intense energy, we know that. They cannot come below 7,200 miles from the Earth's surface due to a shield, scientists said in a study published in the respected journal Nature on Thursday. It's almost like these electrons are running into a glass wall in space, Daniel Baker of the University of Colorado Boulder said, and the study's lead author said in a statement. Somewhat like the shields created by the force field of Star Trek. The invisible shield, dubbed the plasmapheric hiss, is made up of very low-frequency electromagnetic waves in the Earth's upper atmosphere. Data and calculations help researchers to determine that the hiss deflects incoming electrons, causing them to smash into neutral gas atoms in the Earth's upper atmosphere and ultimately disappear. Quote, "It's very unusual, extraordinary, and pronounced phenomenon," John Foster, Associate Director of MIT's Haystack Observatory, said. What this tells us that if you parked a satellite or an orbiting space station with humans just inside the impenetrable barrier, you would expect them to have much longer lifetimes. During the study, the researchers observed an exceedingly sharp barrier against harmful electrons, which was steady enough to withstand a solar wind shock in 2013. To determine what could create and maintain such a barrier, the researchers considered a few possibilities, including effects from the Earth's magnetic field and radio signals from human transmitters on Earth. It's like looking at the phenomenon with new eyes with a new set of instrumentation, which gives us the detail to say, quote, "Yes, there is a hard, fast boundary." So do you get what's going on here, folks? There's a boundary of electronic radiation, electromagnetic radiation, where communication devices do not work. This is the dome.
And if you're into people like Nazim Haramein, the great physicist scientist, he's even talked about the fact that the sun is a black hole by which you do the time travel, right? So they may have needed to get out when they got out, etc., etc., etc. There may be all sorts of reasons. But they knew that just in case these beings do exist on Earth, that they're there, they erected what is known as an etheric barrier around the Earth, around our Earth. And the magnetic key of that is the moon. And it's still there, by the way. And that is why no man has ever gone beyond the moon. You can go to the moon, but you can't go beyond it. And you never will. They can send a machine out there, but isn't it interested you that they still haven't gone out there as a human form? This is something that's been held from us. You can't. There's a barrier of energy up there around our Earth that's of an esoteric nature. It involves technology, yes, but a technology of an extremely advanced nature that even these aliens probably couldn't crack or get out. So this Earth was in quarantine. If you read C.S. Lewis, he goes into all of this about Earth being quarantined. And the name that he has for our planet is called Fulcandra, the silent planet. It has to be quarantined off from the rest of the 9 planets, because planets are not really material bodies, they're intelligences of a kind. And our planet is under quarantine, so this Armageddon, this inner war, can take place in sequestrament. Okay, just like you quarantine a sick patient.
So is it possible that there is an electromagnetic impregnable dome that we cannot escape from? Well, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Sumerians, many had ancient cosmology of a flat earth with a dome around it, as did the Egyptians, where Nut was said to hold up the dome in the sky. Additionally, the Native Americans, the Toltecs, the Mayans, the Cherokee, many had the very, very similar flat earth dome cosmogony that has permeated for 5,000 years until the Vatican Jesuits got a hold of it and changed us to a heliocentric theory. The Bible is filled with geocentric firmament, ends of the earth, creation stories that is not embraced by Christians today. So have any of you thought about how rainbows are created or why they're arced the way they are? Well, according to Wiki, rainbows are spectacular rays of colors. The sun makes rainbows when white sunlight passes through raindrops. The raindrops act like tiny little prisms. So we're being told that tiny raindrops falling and falling from the sky is what makes the rainbow in the sky. Give me a break. And the curvature exactly conforms to the shape of a dome. Could the rainbow be an expression of the Creator using the prism waters above the dome? This makes much more sense to me these days. Let's get into the physics and mechanics of how an electromagnetic dome might possibly work, how the tides might move up and down an electromagnetic field, as well as how a magnet of a central pole with a positive and a negative circle field would also work, as well as what would be holding up the sun and the moon while it rotated around in the sky above us between 700 miles and 3,000 miles above. Tesla, of course, developed in the 1900s free energy, as well as the technology we use today with Wi-Fi, alternating current. He also developed a death ray and a Tesla shield dome, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But before we get into that, we need to set the record straight a little bit here. And this credit goes to Bruce at the geocentricgnostic.com. The predecessor to Nikola Tesla, alive at the same time, was a man named J.J. Thomson. Thomson was awarded the 1906 Nobel Prize for Physics for the discovery of the electron and for his work on the conduction of electricity and gases. He also had several students that went on to get Nobel Prizes as well. The electromagnetic mass was initially a concept of classical mechanics, denoting to how much the electromagnetic field or the self-energy was contributing to the charged particles. Due to the self-induction effect, electrostatic energy behaves as having some sort of momentum, which apparently electromagnetic mass, which can increase the ordinary mechanical mass of bodies. The increase should arise from the electromagnetic self-energy. So it's self-creating energy. Basically what it's tapping into is the electromagnetic field that's all around us. Now, Tesla had developed what he called a Tesla shield, or what we call a Tesla shield, or a 3D scalar interferometry hemiospherical shell, an impregnable shell that was to be used by the military. It could be defend anything at anywhere. And this is what he took from the electromagnetic dome above. And there's a lot of evidence that Tesla did know about the dome. Now here's a picture of Tesla technology in action, and you can clearly see that if the center pole was a positive, the North Pole, that would be the Arctic Circle around the perimeter, the Antarctic Circle, excuse me, around the perimeter, and you can imagine the dome going up and above that. And here's another picture from below, looking at the dome from above, an electromagnetic field, and another picture as well. Now, a magnetic dipole is this technology, and here's a drawing of it, and you'll notice it's very much the same mechanics and physics as a standard speaker you would have in a car or in your home. And you can see here that there's a center positive and then a surrounding negative around here. Same way it works on the magnetic speaker with the magnet here, centralized positive and then a negative field going around the speaker. So the center would be the North Pole, the Arctic, and the surrounding would be the Antarctic electromagnetic energy field. Here we see again that the ancient cosmology reflects a centralized battery pole with a 12th heaven or 7th heaven above, very similar to the speaker. Thor and his hammer, his thunder hammer, blasting through the dome, as well as lightning strikes coming from the heavens in the electrical universe. Tesla famously had his electrical program of free energy pulled by J.P. Morgan, and two gentlemen, David Talbot and Walter Thornhill, have picked it up with a book and documentary called Thunderbolt of the Gods, where they postulate that we do live in an electric universe based on plasma. Let's get into that a little more. So the electric universe. The electric universe is based on observations and experiment than abstract theory. It recognizes connections between diverse disciplines. It concludes that crucial requirement for understanding the universe is to take fully into account the basic electrical nature of atoms and their interactions. Strangely, this is not the case in conventional cosmology, where weaker magnetism and the infinitely weaker force of gravity rule the cosmos. Such a simplification may suit a theoretical physics based on electric neutrality of matter in earthly laboratories, but it does not apply in space where plasma dominates. Plasma has been called the fourth state of matter after solids, liquids, and gases. Most of the matter in the universe is the form of plasma. A plasma is formed and some of the negatively charged electrons are separated from the host atoms in a gas, leaving the atoms with a positive charge. The negatively charged electrons and the positively charged atoms, known as positive ions, are then free to move separately under the influence of an applied voltage or magnetic field. Their movement constitutes an electrical current. So one of the more important properties of plasma is that it can conduct electrical current. It does so by forming current filaments that follow magnetic field lines. Filamentary patterns are ubiquitous in the cosmos. So part of the unique behavior of plasma. Although plasma behavior follows simple electromagnetic laws, the resulting complexity continues to astonish the specialists who study it. These filaments tend to braid themselves into ropes that act as power transmission lines with virtually no limit to the distances of which they can operate. In a rarefied plasma space, the subtle flow of electricity is not easily measured, but these currents leave a definitive signature, a network of magnetic fields throughout the observed universe. Astronomers detect these fields, but give no attention to the electrical cause. Magnetic fields are produced only by electricity. The complex magnetic fields we observe are evidence that plasma is carrying electrical energy across galactic and intergalactic space, powering and organizing secondary systems. Exceedingly subtle changes and balances across the immense volume of space are quite sufficient to configure and animate cosmic structures at all scales of observation. To see the connection between plasma experiments and plasma formations, it is essential to understand the scalability of plasma phenomena. Under similar conditions, plasma discharge will produce the same formations irrespective of the size of the event. As above, so below. How many of us are consciously aware they were first and foremost electro vibrational beings? How many are aware that nearly the same exact frequencies resonate in the Earth's electrical field, known as the Schumann resonance, as do humans? Our vibrational frequencies change whether we are sleeping in a calm state or in a higher vibrational, higher consciousness state of being. Here we can see Kirlian photography on humans in different emotional states of consciousness. This is also evidenced as well in the energy chakras of our bodies. If you wanted to control humanity, you would simply need to change the vibrational frequency in the air around them. Few know or are aware that geoengineering practices over the past decades have been successfully used exactly for these purposes, to keep us from accessing our higher consciousness through altering of the energy fields above using HARP and over-the-counter radar for decades. Taking a little sidebar here, this is from a post I did a little while ago on my blog, tabooblog.com. And what we talk about is whether or not there was a concerted effort to put rubber soles on shoes. So you notice Paul McCartney here without shoes in this famous Abbey Roads picture, to keep us from being grounded to earth, to get that connectivity between the as above and so below connectivity between positive and negative, so we could be closer to Mother Gaia. This is from Dr. Mercola's website. Mounting evidence suggests the Earth's negative potential can create a stable internal bioelectrical environment for the normal functioning of all body systems. Throughout history, humans mostly walked barefoot with footwear made of animal skins. They slept on the ground. Through direct contact or through perspiration, moistened animal skins used as footwear or sleeping mats, the ground's abundant free electrons were able to enter the body, which is electrically conductive. Though this mechanism, every part of the body could equilibrate with the electrical potential of the Earth, thereby stabilizing the electrical environment of all organs, tissues, and cells. And this quote here, first I was skeptical. I said, my gosh, putting my feet on the ground is going to improve my heart, my body, at least the things that Clint is talking about. But then I spoke to him for about an hour and went from skeptical to being all in. Look, the heart is the most electrical organ of the body. We are electric beings. So we are 2/3 water, everyone knows, which is one of the most conductive elements in nature. Additionally, Earth is more than 2/3 water. It really should be called Mother Water, not Mother Earth. Ancient cosmology believed above the firmament was unfathomable depths of water. Again, conductivity. So let's explore the physics between how tides may work, how the sun and moon may rotate above an electromagnetic field, as well as how the firmament of electromagnetism may interact with our Earth today.
Of the magnets, you see if I can move it on the side, it will again pivot around the axis of the magnet, because it makes sure that the magnetic field inside of it stays the same.
Right. It's astonishing. Can you put it on the track for us?
Yeah. I just levitate it above the track quite high, and I can just rotate it.
So it's actually floating above the surface.
Yeah, it's not floating, it's locked above the surface.
So you could tilt it at an angle and it would still fly
around. Yeah, I can do it like this, and it will just go around like this. I can just go and put it at different height, put them like this.
And lock it at the height.
Lock it, yeah, different height, different configuration.
Right.
And I can even lock it at opposite way. If you could just hold for a minute. High. I'm doing the same thing. I'm locking it upside down, and then it is suspended.
Fantastic.
Music of angels bursts in my head. Got a key from the elders, wake up the dead. Behold, sacred meaning in life. And only in the last dance we shall fight, and we shall win. We've got a soul. Circle is whole. All I can do is keep my fire burning for you, to reach you before the fall. Spirit call. And the wise all dance in the flames. By the rules of another, do you come by the chain? Oh, from the stone, the sword that cuts away. Kick down all the walls that have made us slaves. Remember, dream, come on, remember how. Heed to your freedom, 'cause the time is now. Coming from the country, going to the sun, and we're never ever gonna rest till our songs are sung. Music of